I am continuing my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am reading in a chronological order of events, not according to publication or volume, so I will be skipping around a bit as I move along. We are now going to do a brief reading in the histories before we again continue in Jeremiah. So right now, this will be 2 Kings, chapter 23. We will be reading the first 20 verses of the chapter. And this is continuing in the story of King Josiah. Josiah, as we've read, he was only 8 years old when he became king. When he was 16, in his 8th year, he turns his heart to the Lord, likely after the preaching of Zephaniah the prophet. And in his 12th year, he begins a reformation, destroying all idols. Shortly after, Jeremiah begins prophesying, and then in his 18th year, meaning he's now 24 years old, he starts repairing the temple. They find the lost book, most likely the book of Deuteronomy, and from that, they all get very scared. They ask Huldah the prophetess, and she says, yes, Jerusalem's doomed, it's going to be destroyed, but because Josiah is such a great guy, we're going to delay that destruction until he is dead. He's going to have a peaceful life. And that's where we left it off. So here we go. Chapter 23. Josiah reads the book of the covenant to the people. They covenant to keep the commandments. Josiah overturns the worship of false gods, removes the sodomites, and puts down idolatry. Idolatrous priests slain. Judah holds a solemn Passover. Egypt subjects the land of Judah. And the king sent, and they gathered unto him all the elders of Judah and of Jerusalem. And the king went up into the house of the Lord, and all the men of Judah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem with him, and the priests and the prophets, and all the people, both small and great. And he read in their ears all the words of the book of the covenant which was found in the house of the Lord. And the king stood by a pillar, and made a covenant before the Lord, to walk after the Lord, and to keep his commandments and his testimonies, and his statutes with all their heart, and all their soul, to perform the words of this covenant that were written in this book. And all the people stood to the covenant. And the king commanded Hilkiah the high priest, and the priests of the second order, and the keepers of the door, to bring forth out of the temple of the Lord all the vessels that were made for Baal, and for the grove, and for all the host of heaven. And he burned them without Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron, and carried the ashes of them unto Bethel. And he put down the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had ordained to burn incense in the high places in the cities of Judah, and in the places round about Jerusalem. Them also that burned incense unto Baal, to the sun, and to the moon, and to the planets, and to all the hosts of heaven. And he brought out the grove from the house of the Lord, without Jerusalem, unto the brook Kidron, and burned it at the brook Kidron, and stamped it small to powder, and cast the powder thereof upon the graves of the children of the people. And he brake down the houses of the sodomites that were by the house of the Lord, where the women wove hangings for the grove. And he brought all the priests out of the cities of Judah, and defiled the high places where the priests had burned incense, from Geba to Beersheba, and brake down the high places of the gates that were in the entering in of the gate of Joshua, the governor of the city, which were on the man's left hand at the gate of the city. Nevertheless, the priests of the high places came not up to the altar of the Lord in Jerusalem, but they did eat of the unleavened bread among their brethren. And he defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the children of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or his daughter to pass through the fire to Moloch. And he took away the horses that the kings of Judah had given to the sun at the entering in of the house of the Lord by the chamber of Nathan-Melech, the chamberlain, which was in the suburbs, and burned the chariots of the sun with fire, and the altars that were on the top of the upper chamber of Ahaz, which the kings of Judah had made, and the altars which Manasseh had made in the two courts of the house of the Lord, did the king beat down and break them down from thence, and cast the dust of them into the brook Kidron. And the high places that were before Jerusalem, which were on the right hand of the mount of corruption, which Solomon the king of Israel had builded for Ashtaroth, the abomination of the Zidonians, and for Chemosh, the abomination of the Moabites, and for Milcom, the abomination of the children of Ammon, did the king defile. And he brake in pieces the images, and cut down the groves, and filled their places with the bones of men. That was a long paragraph. But this is we've had other times where there was a purging of idol worship. But this seems to be saying that even at those times, it wasn't a total. Even with Hezekiah, it doesn't seem to have been. He put down all the worship. He didn't allow the worship of the idols, but he didn't destroy all of the idols and all of the places of worship. Because we got these from the time of Solomon. High places from the time of Solomon. They were still there. Manasseh, he had his repentance and he got rid of all of his idols, but apparently there were still altars that he hadn't moved. They probably weren't using them, at least in the time of Manasseh, because he had turned everything back to the true worship of God, but he hadn't gotten rid of them. And remember, even he took his idols and just threw them out of the city. He didn't destroy them. And so Ammon brought them back in. Josiah is smashing the stone, grinding it to powder. The grove, remember, grove doesn't mean a grove of trees. It means a wooden image. So it says it took the grove out of the house of the Lord. It was a wooden idol. And all the wooden ones he took and burnt them to ashes and scattered the ashes out. All the stone ones he ground them to powder, burnt them, destroyed. This is a complete and utter destruction of everything that is not dedicated to the Lord. And this is more complete than any king before him. Nothing is left. Some of these things may not have been like the stuff that Solomon built. There's a good chance that they weren't even being used anymore by anybody. A few last comments here. The sodomites. Now, of course, this is in reference to Sodom and their sexual immorality, but this is specifically talking about what would be considered sacred prostitutes. And these were women and sometimes men who lived near the altars and shrines of pagan gods that would engage in prostitution to help support their idols. So when it talks about the sodomites, where the women wove hangings for the grove, that's what it's talking about. These women were prostitutes that used their bodies to support their idol. That's what it's talking about. Now it also has in 9, nevertheless the priests of the high places came not up to the altar, but they did eat of the unleavened bread among their brethren. Now, from what I understand, this is talking about, remember that in the time of Manasseh, he put down all the false worship, but he left the high places. He still allowed the people to worship in the high places, but only worship God. And so when it says the priests of the high places, that's what it's talking about. These are the priests who oversee local worship for local congregations. So they don't need they're not going to Jerusalem, but they are allowed to eat their portion of the unleavened bread, which would be for the prophets, which would have been for the priests. But the reason they're not allowed to come to Jerusalem is because they had defiled themselves. So they were still priests, they were still the family of Aaron, but they were no longer permitted to act the role of priest in the temple. But they were still given their portion as members of the family of Aaron. So that's what that's talking about. Those are the last two things I wanted to mention, just to make sure we understood those. But before we close out, we are going to turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 34, and we're going to read verses 29 through 34, finish out this chapter. So let's read that quickly here. Verse 29. Then the king sent and gathered together all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. And the king went up into the house of the Lord, and all the men of Judah, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the priests, and the Levites, and all the people, great and small. And he read in their ears all the words of the book of the covenant that was found in the house of the Lord. And the king stood in his place, and made a covenant before the Lord, to walk after the Lord, and to keep his commandments, and his testimonies, and his statutes, with all his heart, and with all his soul, to perform the words of the covenant which are written in this book. And he caused all that were present in Jerusalem and Benjamin to stand to it. And the inhabitants of Jerusalem did according to the covenant of God, the God of their fathers. And Josiah took away all the abominations out of all the countries that pertained to the children of Israel, and made all that were present in Israel to serve, even to serve the Lord their God. And all his days they departed not from following the Lord, the God of their fathers. This is a much shorter account of the same basic story. But remember, it was in 2 Chronicles already that we were told in the 12th year of Josiah, he started this reformation of destroying the idol worship. So exactly how these events played out is a little bit unsure. He may have started in the 12th year, but after finding the book in the 18th year, he went real gung-ho on it, and that's when he moved up into the northern kingdom and destroyed the stuff in Bethel and up into Naphtali, as it says. But so the exact order of events we're not sure, but he did wipe out all idol worship, not just ending the worship of idols, but destroying everything that was in any way connected to idols. The most total purge of idol worship ever seen in Israel. We will be returning to Jeremiah for several more chapters, so we will see you there.